To start us off, the return of Palpatine.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
What? 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 What?
Just a flesh wound.
This plot point, from every single angle that you look at it, this is stupid. The giant leaps in logic that they took to have him brought back out of nowhere are so damning. And the disregard for the previous films is so insulting that I actually felt the physical assault through my monitor. Somehow, Palpatine returned, with no goddamn explanation. You want me to buy the idea that he not only somehow survived exploding twice, but also survived the vacuum of space and traveled all the way to this undiscovered distant planet without anybody noticing him. I thought Leia Poppins was ridiculous, but this is just an entire other level of insanity. There is no way that Palpatine was able to survive this shit. The movie doesn't even bother to tell us how he did it.
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
I'm not kidding, that's the explanation. I'm not being manipulative with my editing. This is the only answer they provide for how he returned. A single line regurgitated from the prequels because they wanted to make the audience go, "Oh, I remember that from Revenge of the Sith. They're tickling my balls with that sweet nostalgia bait." So the dark side of the Force has unnatural abilities that allow you to survive all of this stuff, yet you couldn't do anything to prevent yourself from falling down the shaft. If the Force can be used to fly through the vacuum of space where there's no fucking gravity, I'm pretty sure that you could have used it to float back up. Did he really just not bother to learn how to levitate? Did he really think there would never be a situation where someone would try to throw him off a cliff? They literally use the Force to throw people around like rag dolls. And don't use third-party information to explain this, whether it's a comic or a book or a tweet or an interview or whatever. It's not good storytelling if you need to consume sources outside of the main movies in order to understand the main movies. Information that's crucial to the plot should be included in the films when they first come out, not weeks or months after the fact in a piece of literature where you're expected to pay an additional sum of money to fill up plot holes. I mean, what? Are they gonna say that Palpatine cloned himself and this one is different from the one who died? Oh wait, they actually referenced this in the movie.
Dark science. Cloning. Secrets only the Sith knew.
This is a stupid explanation. First, they completely get the information wrong by stating that cloning was some sort of dark technology that only the Sith knew about. Like, did you just forget the Kaminoans existed? Did you just forget about the giant-ass war that was fought by clones? The thing that played a very crucial role in the story of the original 6 movies? Fuck! It's called the Clone Wars! Last I checked, it was Obi-Wan and Yoda, the Jedi, characters from the light side of the Force who were the ones who ordered the damn things. So where the fuck are you coming from by saying it was some dark science that only the Sith knew about? Disney. I know it sounds hard, like really hard, but it would have only taken you 46 minutes of watching episode 2 to get to the point where they explain their cloning technology. You wouldn't even have to watch the whole movie. Just get to that scene and you would know about the Kaminoans and their cloning facility. I'm not asking for much, just give me something. Just some level of research to show that you gave a damn about the source material. Second, if Palpatine cloning himself is supposed to be the explanation for how he came back, that just begs a whole bunch of questions that make the entire thing confusing. I know there are people who are gonna bring up how he returned through cloning in one of the EU stories, and guess what? It was stupid then too. Basically, they just decided to rip off Dark Empire, meaning they decided to rip off the extended universe after Disney said it was no longer canon. And I think this perfectly encapsulates how desperate Disney was when they decided to pull this stunt. You wrote yourself into a corner so badly that you went for source material that you said, in your own words, is no longer canon. A source that you deemed was inferior and no longer suitable for your long-term goals. I thought the reason Disney made the EU non-canon was because they wanted to make the overall story less complicated and easier to follow. Now you're pulling this complicated and hard-to-follow bullshit as part of damage control. It's a backdoor excuse to salvage your narrative in which you contradict yourself for no reason. We had no source material to work with, my ass. I get that Disney's whole thing is repurposing old stories to the point that they've screwed up the concept of copyright, but doing so as part of damage control instead of wanting to do something unique is a clear sign of incompetence. The sequel trilogy wasn't supposed to be an adaptation. It was supposed to be an entirely new story for the series, and instead you decided to adapt one of the worst ideas to come out of the EU. The one story that gave everyone a bad impression of the EU, and that's the one you put into your canon after trashing Legends. You trashed it for more creative freedom, but then you resorted to ripping it off and doing a terrible job at it. You lied about wanting to start over when you retconned Star Wars back in 2014, and you copied off a story that even fans and George Lucas didn't like as it cheapened Anakin's sacrifice. And then you made it official. I get that the extended universe was never technically canon. It was basically a bunch of random stuff from different writers who threw in their own idea for furthering Star Wars. But this goes beyond just throwing in a random idea. This is a blatant money scam that you clearly came up with in an act of desperation. At least the EU included some disclaimer saying that episodes 1 through 6 still hold the true canon, and can supersede anything they write. They can be viewed as self-contained stories. Disney just came along and said, we're just gonna add this to the canon and make it official no matter how badly it screws it up. The concept of Palpatine surviving through cloning, regardless of which one you're looking at, is a confusing and flawed concept. Killing a clone, even with an absence of bodies, doesn't guarantee preventing someone from coming back. I can actually imagine a future story where they have some sort of plot twist where Palpatine had another clone and just came back through that one. If Palpatine created one clone, he would be smart enough to make more. Why would he stop at just one? It's a lazy concept and a plot hole because there's nothing stopping them from saying, just kidding, he had another clone.
What a twist!
Cloning has already become a very overused concept in Star Wars. This just shows a very strong reliance on recycling previous ideas because you're so creatively bankrupt that you can't think of any other way to raise the stakes. There's no sense of finality to it because we've already seen Palpatine being destroyed, so the story's just going around in circles. And it also removes the finality from episode 6 because Palpatine didn't really die in that movie. And even after that, the questions and plot holes just keep piling up. If this Palpatine is a clone, why did he allow himself to deteriorate so much? The clone in Dark Empire didn't allow himself to deteriorate. If he has a limited supply, why is he smart enough to have a clone in case someone killed him but dumb enough to assume that only one would be enough? And if clones deteriorate so quickly, why use them at all? Couldn't he have done something like the Joker where he places his consciousness in a microchip and secretly implants it in someone's brain? And if they're just doomed to deteriorate, how would absorbing someone's energy rejuvenate the body? It's implied that this plan was set up with a cult called the Sith Eternal, but that doesn't make sense either. Palpatine didn't discover Sith cloning by himself or he would have cloned himself earlier, right? Someone had to teach him. With all the Sith Lords dead in episode 6, that would leave the cultists as the only ones who know about the art of Sith cloning. So why didn't they contact Palpatine or Plagueis or any of the Sith before and teach them? Since the cultists love the Sith so much. And if they did teach Sith Lords before Palpatine, why didn't they use clones? And what's the point of the rule of 2 now? That there's a master and an apprentice and it's okay for the apprentice to kill the master and take their place so that the Sith can survive through the most powerful dark side user. If the master knows Sith cloning, he's essentially immortal, and makes the rule of 2 obsolete. And to add insult to injury, we also have a moment where Kylo is exploring Palpatine's lair and there's a container of Snoke clones. Well, wait a minute. You mean to tell me that Palpatine can clone not just himself, but other Force users? What kind of bullshit is that? Palpatine being able to just clone Force users and create them is so universe-breaking. If you can just make a legion of all-powerful Force users, why didn't you do that from the start? Why didn't you clone Darth Vader? If you can really create an almighty Force user from scratch, why didn't you keep doing it? Remember, Snoke has been around since before Luke tried to kill Kylo in his sleep, so we had plenty of time to create a legion of perfect Force users to dominate the good guys. And furthermore, why would Palpatine create a puppet for the people who followed him before when they could simply follow the real Palpatine? If he was just going to take over anyway, why bother with Snoke? It's not like the First Order had a facade to maintain, they were constantly kidnapping children. And if Palpatine created Snoke, how did he control him? How is Snoke so powerful with the Force if he's just a clone? Did he know Palpatine created him? Did he directly serve him? If he did, why didn't he inform Palpatine that Rey and Kylo were a Force dyad? By introducing this stupid clone plot point, you've opened this giant can of worms with so many dangling questions that the movie doesn't bother to answer. And even putting aside all this information, not only is this horrible writing, it's lazy writing. Let's hear that line from Poe again, shall we?
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Yeah, here's what that translates to. We had no idea what to do after Snoke died, so we brought back Palpatine without an explanation just so we can redeem Kylo at the end. You killed Snoke in the most arbitrary way possible and forced Kylo into the main villain chair in spite of him being an incompetent dunce. So now, in order to have any form of tension, you pulled Darth Sidious out of your ass. You did this 40 years after the fact with no build-up, with no hint he was still alive, and ignored George's own words that he was absolutely dead at the end of episode 6. You know that thing Mega Man X keeps doing where they bring Sigmas back to life at the end of each game with no explanation? That's what Star Wars has devolved into. The great irony of this trilogy telling us to let the past die, and then bringing back the final boss battle from 40 years ago for nostalgia points, could not be any more obvious if they were doing this intentionally.
It's too much!
And it's even worse here. At least Dark Empire tried to provide us with some kind of detailed explanation for how he came back. This movie brings him back in a way that just expects you to buy it. His return is not explained thoroughly. They just say dark side stuff and that's it. You can use that stupid prequel line as an answer for any question and it would have the same validity. How did you come back? Dark side stuff. Where did you get this giant-ass fleet? Dark side stuff. How did you find this extremely remote place at the very edge of the galaxy and built this cloning facility? Dark side stuff. How did you create Snoke? Dark side stuff. This entire plot point can just be summed up with a wizard did it, and you're an idiot if you accept this as the explanation for how any of this works. By putting he's back in the opening crawl, Abrams deliberately chose to avoid explaining anything and undermines the original 6 movies as well as the previous 2 films. It recontextualizes the entire story in the worst way possible, and it happens completely out of left field. This is something that builds upon my point in the previous video regarding how this trilogy had no plan. And if there's some sort of written information or some interview with Abrams saying this was planned from the beginning, he's a fucking liar. If Palpatine coming back was always part of the plan, why didn't you tell the actor about it until a year before the Rise of Skywalker came out?
It's a total surprise when about a year ago, yeah, it is that long, I had an email from JJ saying, is there a good time to call you? And where should I call you? So I emailed back to such and such a time, and this is the best phone number to get me on. And then he called me straight away and said, we're thinking of bringing back the Emperor.
This just reinforces how completely pointless Snoke was to the plot, and all the time the first 2 movies wasted by putting so much focus on him. Snoke was his own guy who trained Kylo to become the most powerful dark side apprentice in his plot to take over the galaxy. Actually no, he was just pooped out of a test tube by Palpatine and a disposable pawn. You know what would have been better? If Snoke was in Palpatine's place. Make it so that he didn't fully trust Kylo and the guy he killed was just a clone. Have him reveal his clone bodies and his plan to attain immortality and he was testing Kylo or something. It'd be stupid, but it'd be far less contrived than retconning Palpatine's death. Maybe he could have used some sort of mind trick on Kylo and Rey, and retreated to some sort of secret facility. I don't know, just be creative. There was no need for Palpatine to come back when you already had other antagonists you could have focused on. Kylo, Hux, the Knights of Ren, make one of them the main villain. Just something different from what we've seen before. But no, you decided to rely on nostalgia bait and brought back Palpatine 36 years after he exploded. Twice. I can only think of 2 reasons why they would go with this writing decision. Either they were really desperate to get people back in their good graces after they royally fucked up with the last movie, or they just had no idea what to do with Kylo. Palpatine was planned from the start, sure, and a whole Sith fleet and army came back with him. This was a cheap method for salvaging a movie trilogy they knew they fucked. Imagine if there was a new Lord of the Rings trilogy. The plot is that the One Ring survived being thrown in a Mordor because it was caught on a rock or it was lava-proof or whatever. And Sauron survived because who gives a shit? Now someone completely unrelated to Frodo with no connection to any of the main characters from the first 3 movies has to come and complete the original plot. That's the sequel trilogy in a nutshell. The damage this causes is overwhelming because what was the point of the original 6 movies if they didn't matter? It diminishes the importance of the overall story and makes the telling of the OT irrelevant. Palpatine was a villain for a different era of Star Wars. Return of the Jedi was written as the conclusion for his story. Bringing him back is a cheap plot device. It literally feels like something a 6-year-old would come up with. Do you not understand how this shows how fucking stupid J.J. Abrams is? He made The Force Awakens a rehash of A New Hope, which no one wanted, and then he made The Emperor Return, and even worse, used Dark Empire as a reference which no one wanted. And in the process, he demolishes the accomplishments of all the characters in the OT. All the heroes were useless. None of them killed the Sith and restored balance. Leia's New Republic was a complete failure, and Luke failed to re-establish the Jedi. This doesn't make Palpatine a more cunning and dangerous villain. It just makes the heroes look like incompetent fools. All of them failed horribly and Palpatine is laughing at them from behind the scenes. You could have done anything but bring Palpatine back with no explanation. Darth Jar Jar would have been a better idea than this utter stupidity. They don't tell us how he survived and everyone just accepts it immediately. Oh sure, the Jedi were just a myth that weren't real, but Palpatine surviving a giant space station exploding, and the vacuum of space? That's something we need to worry about. They brought him back with no logical answer just so feminists like Kathleen Kennedy can watch him getting killed by a woman instead of a man. Whatever agenda you're trying to push doesn't mean anything when you start bringing old characters back to life just so you can write whatever crap you want. I'm just supposed to believe he's alive and that he somehow had this entire other army and this enormous fleet of Star Destroyers with built-in Death Star lasers and that he's somehow able to lift them all up from under the ice by himself. I mean, shit. He's lifting up hundreds, maybe thousands of ships by himself. Was Palpatine really this powerful the whole time? This is so fucking insane, and yet we're supposed to be taking it seriously. Isn't there supposed to be some kind of limit to how one uses the Force? Isn't using too much of it at once supposed to kill you? You mean to tell me Palpatine can lift trillions of tons of machinery with ease, but Luke died after struggling to send a single projection to distract Kylo? Good God, you really did turn the Force into some sort of generic comic book superpower. This is some Marvel DC level shit. Where did this even come from? Where the hell did he get this giant fleet? Seriously, they just pulled this shit right out of their ass. How did Palpatine put all this together? They give us no insight on this new military force at all. In the prequels, he played off people's fear and desire for freedom to force the Republic to pay for the armies he'd used to overthrow them. He couldn't simply use the CSI to conquer the galaxy because they would have told him off, and they wouldn't even have the manpower capable of such a feat. And he wouldn't have been able to create his army without the Republic due to how expensive it would be. He had to stage a war to have them pay it off. We know that clones have existed since Episode 4, so people would have to know about them, that they fought in a war, that there were people who weaponized them, how it was a war of galactic proportions, and how it led to Palpatine's rise to power. He was puppeteering the Republic and the people who were fed up with them as a result of infraction and repression. But here, there's no explanation for Palpatine's bullshit army and fleet. We don't know who built it, the resources that were used to make it, or the plan behind putting it together. He pulls this army out of nowhere as a prelude to his real army that he also pulled out of nowhere, despite that he could have used either one to conquer the galaxy in the first place. He didn't need to create this second army when the only similarity with his plan in the prequels is that one of the armies was a decoy. It has no purpose. How did he even assemble this massive military force without drawing attention? How did he give his fleet of Star Destroyers the same destructive capacity as a Death Star? Especially since Kyber crystals aren't as abundant anymore. He can make thousands of Star Destroyers, each with a laser capable of blowing up entire planets, but in the OT he can only build 2 Death Stars. Who the hell greenlit this shit? In order for this military force to exist, Palpatine needed access to so many various resources that were shown to be not available to him, or the Republic, or the Resistance. And in all that time, nobody noticed an entire solar system being picked clean of food and material needed to sustain this army? How did no one notice this? It's not even a shocking new threat. It's just dull and derivative. Apparently the planet-destroying laser wasn't enough for the 3rd time in the saga, so you have to multiply it by 1,000. The First Order had already taken control of the entire galaxy by the time the film started. What does he need this giant-ass fleet for? It's just overkill. Also, you gotta love how he rebrands his forces into the Final Order. From First Order to Final Order. How creatively bankrupt you are. And really, fuck all of you for rendering Anakin's sacrifice completely meaningless. I just feel so bad for Return of the Jedi. It's been retconned 3 times in a row now, and each one somehow manages to be more offensive. Anakin defeating Palpatine was supposed to bring balance to the Force and bring peace to the galaxy. Palpatine returning like this makes a complete mockery of his sacrifice. Anakin didn't bring balance to the Force because the Sith wasn't destroyed. Palpatine survived and continued to toy with the galaxy. He didn't end the war because the Republic failed and the First Order just took over everything. He didn't save the galaxy because it ended up getting ravaged by Snoke and Kylo. He didn't even save his children because they both ended up dead as a result of Palpatine's meddling. It completely ruins the entire saga and Anakin's entire story by making him irrelevant in the grand scheme. Nothing he did ended up mattering because the entire universe just reset. And I know some people are gonna say, oh, but the point of his sacrifice was saving his son. Yeah, a lot of good that did, because he ended up dying anyway. No matter how you look at it, Palpatine returning dampens Anakin's sacrifice. It's ultimately made worthless because the Empire just came back, and his son still died trying to defeat the Empire they thought was destroyed when they originally killed the Emperor. Anakin's sacrifice accomplished nothing. Let's really look at this. Anakin's sacrifice in Return of the Jedi had 3 purposes. 1. Luke would survive and live on. 2. Luke would rebuild the Jedi Order. 3. The Alliance would take advantage of the internal power vacuum in the Empire in order to create a new republic and start freeing the galaxy. Now when you factor in the Disney trilogy, you basically get Episode 6 and Vader's sacrifice ruined because 1. Luke is dead in The Last Jedi. 2. Luke's Jedi Order is destroyed by Kylo before The Force Awakens even happens, and he was too much of a coward to try again. 3. The New Republic was incompetent and dismantled by the First Order, and now there's no one left to face them. There's no Republic, no Luke Skywalker, and no Jedi Order whatsoever. All that's left is a resistance made of the Millennium Falcon and 20 people aboard it. And for those who might say, oh well, the prophecy was a bullshit plot point anyway, making Anakin a chosen one is a terrible cliche. Well, that's not what we're discussing. Now yes, the Chosen One prophecy is a really overused trope and it gets really annoying when it's used. But that's a different topic entirely. This is about how Anakin's actions are made null and void because Palpatine just bullshitted himself back from the dead. Any version of his return where he has a conscious presence in the galaxy post Return of the Jedi cheapens his sacrifice. I'm sorry, I just can't get over this. Palpatine didn't just fall down the shaft. He literally exploded. His body was vaporized by the energy core, and after that, the entire Death Star went boom. You're not gonna survive that, much less the vacuum of space, no matter how much dark side force power you have. George Lucas clearly stated that Palpatine was officially dead, and now you just decide that he survived 40 years later just like that. And even if the answer to all this is supposed to be, oh well, he had a clone and put it on standby in the event of his death, that doesn't make sense either. And if it's really because you just wanted the character back, then you're not doing a good job portraying him. I mean, revealing his presence to the galaxy with a broadcast? That's stupid. The Palpatine who acted in secret and carefully laid out his plot would not reveal himself out in the open. And apparently his ultimate plan is to just destroy everything. Like blow up all the free worlds, which is ridiculous. What are you planning to gain from destroying the galaxy? I thought the point of the original Empire was to sustain control with an iron fist. You're not gonna try and capture or control them? You're just gonna blow them up? Don't you know how many resources you'd be wasting? How many worlds for colonizing your forces you'd be wasting? This just seems like mass slaughter for the sake of being evil. And Palpatine wasn't wasteful. Palpatine didn't get rid of the Republic. He took it over from the inside. He remade the government in his image. Blowing everything up leaves you with nothing to rule and no spoils to inherit. Also, what do you mean by free worlds? I thought the First Order was reigning by the start of The Last Jedi. What free worlds are you talking about? Are you trying to delve into some sort of world building? It's a little bit late for that, don't you think? This is something you're supposed to do in the first and second movie, not during the final chapter of the story. And that's another problem. They put so little effort into showing how this new galaxy functions that there's no stakes involved. You've given us no reason to care about this galaxy, so why should I care if Palpatine's threatening to blow it up? The world building up to this point in the trilogy was so non-existent and rubbish, and now we're supposed to fear for it, which creates a weak sense of tension. We don't know anything about these free worlds, how they operate, their politics, their society, anything that would get us invested. I guess they were trying to focus on the characters, but the way they handled the characters has been extremely poor. A lot of them are very poorly developed, and even the ones who do get some proper development are sidelined for other poorly developed ones. I wouldn't mind too much except for how this trilogy has so much needless padding that it doesn't have enough time to develop these elements of the world. All that time that could have been used for meaningful world building, wasted on meaningless bloat. In spite of the stakes being cranked up to an extreme degree, there's no weight to it. I don't care about this world. They did nothing to make it interesting. And I don't care about the vast majority of these characters because they're just so badly written. And speaking of badly written characters, you wanna know how Kylo reacts to being told that Palpatine was manipulating him the entire time? Honestly, I can't be sure because he has no reaction. Absolutely nothing. The revelation that Palpatine has been manipulating him for years doesn't faze him at all. Man, Kylo's character really is terrible when you consider how inconsistent his development is. He specifically said he wanted to finish what Vader started, then forgets about it entirely. And then when he's told outright that every voice in his head was a lie, he just doesn't give a shit. Fallout 4 had better writing than this. Dance actually reacted to being told that his life was nothing but lies. Yeah, what was that about Kylo's character development in The Last Jedi? How he wants to forge his own identity instead of being an apprentice to a dark Sith? Well, he just goes back to being an apprentice to a dark Sith. Now, we could talk about how this was one of the many ways Disney wanted to retcon The Last Jedi to get people to stop hating them, but we're gonna be seeing that a lot in this movie, so I suppose we could put that on hold for later. The bottom line is, they already fucked up beyond recognition. Bringing Palpatine back to life at the 11th hour has already opened so many plot holes and caused so many retcons, and we haven't even gotten past the opening crawl. Good God, what is with these sequels fucking up before finishing the opening crawl? Jesus Christ, you know what I just realized? This movie is already worse than The Last Jedi, and we're only 7 minutes into the film.
I cannot begin to tell you how much this is going to hurt.
Okay, this is something that I had to add in at the last minute because it was something that I found out about after I did the editing for this preview. So maybe I'm just a really stubborn person, or maybe I just have too much free time on my hands, but I was just really hellbent on finding any explanation, just any explanation for how Palpatine survived all of that shit. And I mean a real explanation. No hand-wavy bullshit like we got in the movie, no crazy fan theories on YouTube, just a straight-up answer for how he came back. And even I can't believe this, but I found it. So you've heard about the novelization of The Rise of Skywalker, right? The book version and how it's somehow even worse than the movie? Well, I bring this up because they actually included the official explanation, and this can also be seen on the wiki, so this is the official explanation for how Palpatine came back. And this is such mind-blowing information that I felt like I had to share it with you. It is so mind-bendingly retarded that it's actually astounding. I mean it, to absorb this information as someone who cared even remotely about Star Wars is actually fascinating, and it's just too good to keep to myself. And I'm just picturing the looks on your faces as I tell you this, and it's beautiful. It's actually beautiful. So, here it is. Man, I just wish I could have the power to teleport to your houses as you receive this information so I can take my camera and snap a picture, because I know it's going to be gold. Alright, in all seriousness, here we go. God, you're gonna think I'm bullshitting you when I say this. Okay. The official explanation for how Palpatine came back to life is, he was using his dark side force powers to transport his mind and his soul as his body was still falling down the shaft across trillions of light years through the furthest reaches of space in a matter of seconds to the precise spot where he had prepared his empty vessel clone. Oh, there it is. There's that look on your face. I know I can't see it, but I totally can. Oh. You know, when the people who wrote Catwoman are coming up with less insulting storytelling than you, stop making movies! Leave Hollywood and never come back, you stupid fucks!